Today is the last in our series of lessons that we've been studying on the Ten Commandments. Today we are at Commandment number 1. We started at the back end and we worked our way forward, and today we're at Commandment number 1. The text is Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 and 3. We'll read that or go over that here in just a minute as we get started. I hope that studying these has been a blessing to you, because it's really, the Ten Commandments are really the basis of pretty much all the laws of our land. They're the basis of the history of our nation, and so although we say they're in the Old Testament and we don't live by that anymore, they still define for us what God expects of His people, how we should live before Him, and what He counts as important. And so they are important for us as well. So we began this way. And God spoke, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, God said it this way, I think, for a couple of reasons. Number one, so that they would not forget the slavery part. And two, so they don't romanticize Egypt. Both of which they did. Let me read you a couple of passages. Exodus chapter 16. Listen to these words. Chapter 16, verse 1 through 3. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Does that sound about like a bunch of whiny babies or what? How long have they been at it? Yeah, this is only a month and a half, maybe, since they left Egypt. They've not even made it to Sinai yet. Another one I want to read you. 17, verse 7. So God called the name of the place, I think it's God, let's see. Yeah, God's speaking. So He called the name of the place Massa and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Think about that just a minute. It's only been a month and a half since they saw all the plagues of Egypt. It's only been a month and a half or less since they crossed the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army on their heels, and God opened the waters and they walked across on dry land. And then He, as the Egyptians followed them into the sea, He closed the waters over them and drowned the whole army of Pharaoh. It's only a month and a half. And they've already lost heart. They've already, the first time they got hungry, they did not trust that God was going to provide for them. They were fussing and crying. Okay. Now remember, Moses is the only one in this whole group, and it's close to 2 million people, they say, that are in this mass of people that's moving towards Sinai. Moses is the only one in this whole group who has not been a slave his whole life. Okay? So you got to, this is their mindset. They don't know what to do next. They have to be told what to do next. That's the kind of mentality they have. They did realize the Egyptians had been mistreating them, and they had registered a complaint with the Lord. But the fact that He is the only God may not have been impressed on them very well, very effectively, because they were surrounded by people who believed in many, many gods. The Egyptians, the 10 plagues, if you remember, about a year ago we looked at the 10 plagues and we saw where God targeted, each plague was targeted to an Egyptian god. And he had defeated that god. He had demonstrated how he had power over that god and the god's influence. That was for Israel's understanding as well as Pharaoh's. He's trying to make a point to Pharaoh. But the Israelites should have been getting the message too, and the Egyptian people as well. When we study Israel's story, we learn how quickly they gave up their worship of the God of their fathers. I want to look at what he says here in a few minutes and see what we can learn today. He says, I am the Lord your God. Question, do you have other gods that make demands on your time? Israel certainly did. These days you might deal with the goddess of pleasure. She's pleasing and pleasant, beautiful. And it's really a beautiful time when you're with the God of pleasure. Pleasure is delightful and engaging and a blessing to you. And she was created to be a blessing. She was not created to be God. And if you worship her, if you worship pleasure, she transforms into a demon that will not tolerate you withholding her desires from her. She is out of her element if you turn her into a god. What once was a beautiful, singing, delightful thing becomes a roaring, screaming tyrant that won't let you sleep or rest. She will even destroy your favorite relationships. Just ask your local drug addict if that's not the case. Addiction to food, to sugar, or really on down to the hard stuff. Addiction will destroy your relationships. You choose which one. How hard is it to escape her grip once she gets a hold of you? Perhaps the God that appeals to you is power. We like control, most of us. At least the illusion of control. We're drawn to worship this God at a very early age. Long before we recognize it as tribute or worship. The baby that won't lay still while you change his diaper, or the 2-year-old that stomps her foot at you and hollers no at your instructions. It's the power struggle expressing itself, and you must break that behavior and teach them to submit to your authority, or else you pay the consequences. We chuckle when they're young and it's cute, but when they're 22 and they don't yet know how to respect authority, we are miserable. And we pay out big bucks for law enforcement to make sure they're corralled. Because moms and dads have allowed them to worship the God of power and haven't taught them to respect their neighbors and the laws of the land. There are other gods, lesser gods, we could mention, but these two should be enough to support the point that there are other beings who will gladly step into God's place in your life and your thoughts and accept God's worship in His glory. If we thought of them as actual beings, demons, or dark forces, or even Satan himself, we might not be so inclined to give them our allegiance. Most of us would not just blatantly go out after something that demands our Father's rightful place. But we find ourselves in that very position quite often. We must guard against all these things. God continues in Exodus 20. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And you might think, I don't live in Egypt. However, look a little closer at that situation, if you would. Egypt was the most affluent and powerful country in the world at that time. Sound familiar? You could find about whatever you wanted there. Yet its affluence was at the expense of the Israelites, the slaves. That's where we live, in the most affluent country in the world. We really like our affluence. Don't you be messing with my standard of living, you hear? That's what we would say. I have a refrigerator to cool my food and my drinks. And most of us have a whole house full of bought air. And I like it that way. I have that at my house. Most of us live under the air conditioner. A good bit of our world doesn't have running water. So, you remember what that's like? That's no shower. Bedtime. You just go to bed sweaty. Or you wipe off with a wash rag. No washing dishes in the kitchen sink unless you pack the water from the well or the spring. The same with washing your clothes. Sorry. Now many of you remember how to live like that. I know. I missed out on that generation. Where I grew up, we had running water. And that had a good job, so we could pay a water bill, and we enjoyed that. But Rita's family, she grew up in the same kind of conditions I did. They paid the water bill, and they had running water at her house. But her family that lived in Clay County packed a lot of their water. I don't expect that you really want to go back to living like that, do you? God says He brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I want to think a minute about slavery. What kind of slavery would you like to think about? We hear some about human trafficking these days. And you mean it's kind of like Joseph, who got sold to a caravan full of traders and got separated from his family. You may know families who have lost their one or more children to a thief who stole the child and sold it. What about sexual slavery? I'm not sure why we might think that this would not be happening in Egypt in these days. They had all kinds of other slaves. you were rich enough to afford to buy a slave, you could do whatever you wanted to with the slave. Forced labor slavery is what the primary form of slavery for the Israelites. They were forced into physical labor. Forced marriages there's no record of that happening in the Exodus account, but it's happening today, especially in parts of the Muslim world. Young girls are being forced into that situation. The International Labor Organization, ILO, estimates over 50 million slaves worldwide. We thought it was eradicated with the Civil War. With forced labor alone accounting for $236 million illegal profits every year. That's labor not paid to the workers, but what went straight to the boss's pocket. As of 21 of January this year, 2025, they estimate about 1.1 million slaves in the USA. That kind of sobered me a little bit. All these forms of slavery are present and running strong in our country today. These are the types of things that were happening in Egypt in Moses' day. Forced labor and murder of their babies, particularly. I'm telling you, in a lot of ways, Exodus and its 10 Commandments is not very different. It's current events for us in 2025. There is a type of slavery that is self-inflicted. It's called substance abuse. It's every bit as ruthless, perhaps more so, than physical, other types of slavery. The dark spiritual slave driver is merciless when it comes to its demands on you. Many of us have experienced this firsthand, either personally or with our loved ones. We know what it's like and how much of a wreck it makes out of lives. And our God is still about freeing those prisoners and slaves that are caught up in that mess. Maybe your Father in the heavens has rescued you from that house of slavery, just like their old Israelites. If so, maybe you realize better than most folks why he seems so over the top protective about his worship. He alone has earned it. He alone is very special to him because it cost him dearly. Don't give what should be his worship. I've got it written down here right in front of me. I can't read it here. Don't give what should be his alone to some slug of a preacher who has done nothing for you except maybe laugh. Today we have gathered here to honor him as a whole body of believers for who he is, Jehovah God, and what he has done for us collectively. He's rescued us from the powers of dark places and brought us into the light of his very presence. It might be a little difficult to get serious about your worship unless you remember your Egypt. Do you have a place that you were rescued from? Those are my thoughts this morning. So think on these things.